Point of order, Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish to raise a point of order on behalf of my constituent, Lisanne Zeitzman, who is a wife, businesswoman, employer and valued and respected community member on the Isle of Arran. She has been ordered to leave the UK by the 12th of July by the Home Office. Now, I have taken this most urgent matter up with the Immigration Service and the Immigration Minister. And to further highlight this case, I have tabled an early day motion and will present a petition to Parliament to show the strength of feeling about this matter. Given the urgency of this case, can you, Madam Deputy Speaker, advise me what other avenues are open to me to do all I can to have this appalling decision reversed to prevent Lisanne having to leave her husband, her business and her community in 9 days' time?
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear, Patricia.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her point.
Hello there, this is Broadcasting Scotland at 7 and I am not Gordon Ross. He's gone with his bucket and spade on holiday and we'll see him hopefully when he gets back. But I'm here tonight along with Victoria Johnson from up north, and we've got quite a special programme for you today with a couple of interesting films we're going to talk about immigration first of all, and the architect of that big problem of hostile environment has been in Scotland today. Theresa May's been up in Perth giving a speech talking about strengthening the union of the United Kingdom. Theresa May said a lot of different things this afternoon, but the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said, well, maybe one of the biggest parts of Mrs May's legacies will be the independence of Scotland. And one of the things that's been driving that is the number of stories that we've heard in the news and the number of stories that personally I've been involved with and other people I know have been involved with people being ejected from Scotland because of the immigration policies of Westminster, which we have no control of over here in the Holyrood Parliament. So today we've got a film of a woman who's come to prominence. Her name's Lisanne Zeitzman. Some people say Zeitman, some people say, but I think Zeitzman is the proper pronunciation. Now she is with her partner John Malpass, and they have a sandwich shop up in Arran, and they've put a lot of effort into making it, but they've been now told by the immigration authorities that they don't earn enough money for Lisanne to stay in Scotland, so they've told her she's got to go home. And that's what Patricia Gibson was talking. I mean, when I say home, I think she comes from South Africa originally, but whether she goes back there, I don't know. But Patricia Gibson is the MP, and we saw the video of her as we started the programme. So now Kenny McBride went over to Arran to talk to John Malpass about all of this, and you can watch that film and learn all about this story, and then Victoria and I will discuss it when the film's finished.
Hello, I'm Kenny McBride for Broadcasting Scotland. We're here at the sandwich station in Lochranza on Arran, and we're here to talk to John Malpass. John Malpass is the part owner of the sandwich station here with his wife Lisanne Zeitzman. Lisanne is a South African citizen who's been here on a spousal visa for a few years, and they've just been told that Lisanne's visa is not going to be renewed because of income. And we're here to talk to John about Lisanne, about her struggle, about her dispute with the Home Office, and what's going to happen in the future. Hi John, how are you? Now, first of all, could you tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to end up here in Arran?
Yes, absolutely, Kenny. My family have been round on Arran since the 1950s. Myself, it was always a holiday destination until I left school, when I moved to the island for good, and started working as
talk to John about
and then
Lisanne,
chef at the
about her
restaurant,
struggle, about her
where I met my wife in 2006.
and what's going to happen.
And so you got married.
Hi John, how are you?
Then?
Now,
and what happened then? Where have you been, and how did you end up back here?
Before we actually married, we were together, and my wife is Zimbabwean but with a South African passport. So at the time she was on a working holiday visa,
Sorry, what's up?
which was expiring. So I decided to join her back in Africa.
I can't hear you.
And then we spent the next, it was about 9 years
My sound is
traveling around southern Africa, particularly Zambia, where we were working in the safari industry, managing safari lodges, up until 2015, when after both my parents had died, we had a bit of a lump sum which we wanted to invest, and we didn't feel that Africa was a particularly safe place to invest. So we decided to come over to Scotland as just to sort of clear our heads and have a think. But that's when we came back and decided that this was a home for us, and we were going to make a go of it here and invest.
Okay. And your wife Lizanne, what was her immigration status at that point?
When she first came over, it was because it was a short-term thing initially. It was a tourist visa, and then as soon as we decided that we were going to make this a permanent thing, she had to leave the country and return to South Africa to apply for a spousal visa. Because we had a bit of a lump sum in the bank account at the time, I was able to get her and I was her sponsor. So we got our first spousal visa by that means. Then that needed renewing after 2.5 years, which is where we find ourselves now.
I see. And so what actually happened? Could you tell us just a bit about what happened when you made that reapplication?
Yes, certainly. It was the end of January when the first visa ran up, so we put in the application before that. After speaking to an immigration lawyer, we were rather shocked to find out that the Home Office would only take into account our first year of trading, and unfortunately, just to bad circumstances, we registered the business in February of 2017, but only started trading later on in May. Because we were going through the acquisition of the business. So the Home Office, we were told, would only consider February till February period, which was obviously not a complete season, and we didn't pay ourselves quite as much as we needed to for the requirement, because basically we didn't need to. We were quite happy with what we were taking out of the business and didn't want to take out more. We'd rather reinvest it.
I see. And is there no provision in the Home Office regulations for people in your situation, people who have started a business but haven't obviously managed a full year of trading, or are still maybe in that startup phase where there's not a lot of money coming in?
I'd have to say absolutely not.
Okay. And so what have the Home Office then told you since then?
Well, we put in the application under Section 8 Human Rights because we couldn't satisfy the financial requirement, and that was something else that we could basically give a go to. We didn't hear back from them. The application went in January, and we only heard back from them on Wednesday 19th of June, so just past now. The first correspondence we heard from them was that Lizanne's visa had been refused. She must leave the country immediately. She must stop working. Otherwise, she is under threat of detention and deportation. That was the very first we heard back from them.
So a business that she is the part owner of, she's not allowed to work in?
Yeah, that's correct. She's a 50% shareholder. We're both directors of the company. Yes, and she's not allowed to work.
Well, that's kind of extraordinary. So what happens now? Is there any kind of appeals process, and how is that going?
On the letter which we got from the Home Office, it stated that any appeal had to be made from outside of the United Kingdom, so she would have to leave to appeal. At the moment, we are talking to people like yourselves. We've got a massive petition online which has got well over 5,000 signatures so far. We've got a lot of other media interest as well. People obviously very shocked about this. Local residents very angry about it as well. But we are planning for the worst, hoping for the best. Our MP, Patricia Gibson, has been fantastic. She is really pushing our case. We received communication from her last night that she was going to try and get this issue raised under Prime Minister's questions today. But she can only do so much, and it does seem quite clear that Scotland does not have a particularly big voice in Westminster. So I'm waiting to hear back from Patricia, see how she got on today, but that's basically all we can do. Then, if Lisanne has to leave, her flight had to get booked the day after receiving the letter. So she's flying out on the 12th of July. If she has to fly out, then we'll have to wait for a minimum of 30 days for a reapplication from outside of the country with me as a sponsor again, which will take a minimum of 6 weeks. That means if we have to pay the standard 1,500-ish for the application and then another 690 for fast tracking to be done within 6 weeks. So potentially best case scenario, I could be seeing her again at the end of October, which is obviously the end of all the tourist season and a long time away. If we don't pay for the fast tracking, then it would be 12 weeks.
And so is that likely to have much impact on the business?
Yeah, very much so. It is a growing business. We're doing very well here, but we were ready this year to have 2 part-time staff, both doing sort of good 20 hours a week, not just really short-term stuff. The business was ready for that, but now we are having to have 2 part-timers doing that 20 hours each, and also a full-timer to cover it, which I'm not prepared to pay people absolute minimum wage. They're my friends. They've been fantastic. They've done everything to help, so I must look after them as well. And yes, it's going to very negatively affect the business. It's unlikely if we'll be able to show a profit this year, which is what we were really hoping for in the 3rd year, would be a good profitable year so that we could expand further next year.
So this is actually a drag on a successful small business in an otherwise, small rural community that needs successful small businesses.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and us surviving is crucial to a lot of other businesses as well. I believe you've spoken to some other people about the other suppliers. We're kind of symbiotic with so many other different suppliers. I mean, George Grassy, who runs the Blackwater Bakehouse, he supplies us with all his bread. I actually worked with him and got trained by him before we bought the sandwich station. So, we are his biggest customer, and without us, he would have to lose staff as well. There's Skipness Smokehouse, there's Robin Gray, who grows all our leaves. The list is endless, really. It's and obviously we're supplying a public service. Here with the ferry terminal, there's no food or drink facilities on board the ferry, so we are the only place around to service the Calmac ferry.
Okay, and so what has the support been like from people in the village? Has there been a lot of support, has there been any kind of pushback from people who are not happy about an outsider being here?
Absolutely no pushback at all. Everyone has been absolutely amazing. The outpouring of support is incredible. From friends who've just dropped everything, like Beth, who's helping me in the shop now, who just left her job and jumped in to help with me. To all members of the community, everyone's been writing letters to the MP. Everyone's going around handing out petitions. Yeah, it is a thing that you get in small communities, is when bad things happen, that everybody just joins together and does what they can do to help. And it's very, very touching, and thank you to everyone who's helped.
Okay, and you talked about preparing for the worst but hoping for the best. Now obviously the best would be a very quick turnaround. Lisanne's allowed to come back very quickly. In the worst case scenario, what do you envision happening?
I mean, the absolute worst case scenario would be her applying in South Africa and getting refused again, which would mean having to take on a legal challenge against the Home Office, which would cost every penny we have, really. But well, both of us will continue fighting it. We're not going to bow down to it, because it's unfair, it's completely counterproductive, and it's completely illogical as well. Lausanne having to leave and the business suffering hurts everyone, including the government that we pay taxes to. I mean, we're now VAT registered, so there's significant money going to the government from having this business being successful. Her staying is beneficial to everyone. It's just a completely illogical decision.
And in South Africa, does she still have family, or does she still have connections there, or is she going back to kind of start from scratch at the moment?
She will be going back to stay with her mother, who is retired, has very little money. So Lausanne will be sort of supporting her as well. She's not going to get any support from family over there. She'll be helping them out while she is over there. And it's highly unlikely that I certainly won't be able to go and visit during the duration of the tourist season. And one of the provisos on the letter from the Home Office was that there was no obstacle to myself and Lausanne setting up a business like this in South Africa and going and living there, which is just ridiculous. I mean, I was actually looking at the South African immigration rules, and I would not qualify at present. And I'm, left with a business here with a 10-year lease. Well, I can't close down. Everyone's reliant on it. So, yeah, trying not to think that far ahead, because I hope that's not going to happen.
But having built a business here, having built good relationships with other businesses here, building up that supply chain, and obviously having a customer base, the UK government is telling you that you should just go with her because they don't want her here.
That's correct, yes. They're effectively saying that unless you're very rich, then if you're a British citizen, then you have to marry another British citizen.
Okay. And so what are your next steps right now, and what could our viewers do to if they want to help in some way?
If your viewers do want to help, and I'd very much appreciate it if you could, the best thing to do at the moment is signing our petition online, which can be found at 38 Degrees. Just search for Lausanne Zietsman and you'll find it. And definitely writing to Patricia Gibson, who's our MP. Feel free to write to Nicola Sturgeon, feel free to write to the Home Secretary. Letters count, really, because if Lausanne does have to leave and then make an application from outside of the country, various immigration lawyers and advisors have said that if there is a very large pile of letters that have gone through an MP, that will help her application, as it will make the Home Office a bit worried. So, yeah, if I can ask anyone, thank you very much. I'd appreciate your assistance.
Okay. And just finally, I should probably have asked this a lot sooner. How is Lausanne doing?
Obviously very, very stressed. There's basically so much going on at the moment that you're just kind of keeping ourselves so busy that you don't really have the time to actually sit and kind of realise the full implications of it. We're actually going away for my birthday just for a night to get away from it all and switch off phones and not look at the internet just for a night to try and actually spend a bit of time together, because all throughout our life, living and working together, we've never been apart for more than a month, and we're generally a metre or two away from each other in the shop or in the house. So it's devastating to not have her around, and I think she feels the same way too.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and all the best to both of you. Best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
This is Kenny McBride reporting from Lochranza in Arran for Broadcasting Scotland.
To sign that petition, you'll find the link to the website 38 Degrees on the Broadcasting Scotland website, and I think you might well find a picture of Lausanne and John together there as well. It's a situation with all these different stories of people being deported or sent back to where they've come from, or indeed sent back to places they've never been to before, which is a catalogue longer than anybody's arm. Last year I met met up with Russell and Ellen Felber from Inverness. And in fact, as part of this particular item, I really wanted to get an interview from them again, but Ellen is still suffering from the problems of the depressions and that she felt, because Russell and Ellen, they made the front page of all the national newspapers last year when their enterprise visa was rescinded. They put in £400,000, come from America, bought themselves a bed and breakfast in Inverness, made it all beautiful, got many awards for their services to people, employed people, and along the way, during the time they were there were 5,000 changes to the different visa requirements, and one of those was that they had to employ one more person, which they would have gladly done had they only known, but they were not told. And so this almost turned into a tragedy, but thanks to Drew Hendry and many others, it was managed to turn around, and Ellen and Russell are still running their bed and breakfast in Inverness now, and but Ellen is still suffering and still trying to get over that terrible trauma, which anyway. So now I'm not sure Victoria's going to join us again, but there was a technical hitch in and all that, but there she is, look next to me, perfectly timed, just to give me my time for my little story of pinching your territory there, Victoria. But I think that the personal aspect that Kenny brought out at the end is that, was how is Lisanne feeling? I know from the experiences I had, and I've often bring my experiences to the table here because I seem to have had a lot of them, it is a very shocking experience when this kind of thing happens. Now, you're a Greek, you've lived in America, you're now living in Scotland, and I mean, what's the story from your perspective? Because I expect you've come across the immigration situation and the Home Office in your expedition to be where you are now.
It's actually a really funny question. So sometimes you come to these points in your life and you don't realize that you're at such a significant crossroads. But what happened is I actually studied at the University of Glasgow as an American citizen. I met my husband in my final year at university. We eloped to Hawaii. And when we came back, I graduated. So at that point, as far as I understood it, there was like a grace period afterwards, but basically I had come out of the UK and I came to come back in, and I didn't have a return flight. And I get to immigration, I believe it was through Heathrow, and they were like, you don't have a return flight. And I was like, it's okay, I'm married to a Scottish citizen. And they were like, yeah, but you don't have a return flight or a visa. Or I was like, well, we're not sure what we're going to do yet. We had a flat in Glasgow. We were trying to figure out what the next step was for our lives. There was a lot of hostility, and eventually they let me very begrudgingly enter because, I mean, legally, I had the 90-day regular visa that I could have come in, that I came in under. And at that point, we looked at the paperwork for what it was like to register me as a spouse. And we were like, oh my God, it was so incredibly intimidating. And at that point, we were only 22 years old. So I just felt like this Herculean task. My father was in Greece at the time, and I just said, Dad, can you just sort out my Greek paperwork? Because then I can stay, and I'll never, famous last words, I'll never need to worry about this again. As an EU citizen, I can stay in the UK. And so that's when we did, and that's when I got my Greek passport. And it never occurred to me at that point that there would be a day, one, where that Greek passport would no longer entitle me to stay in the UK, but two, that Greek passport would be more powerful than my husband's British one.
It's a fascinating story, that, Victoria. Thank you very much for it. And from my own experience, I can actually vouch exactly what you've been saying, and because maybe I won't go into the very, very great details of of that story. But yeah, I mean, and I think that many people are going to be very, very upset. You hear stories every day about people who are in a similar situation where they just think, well, we're married, so what's the problem? And the other thing, one of my dearest friends passed away several years ago now, but she was a Greek, and she came and married my best friend. And that was a long while ago, I'm afraid to tell you. But I remember having the privilege of speaking at her funeral, and I said to the people, you know, when this lady came to stay in Britain, it was very hostile towards her, and it was very, very difficult for her. She came with 3 different university degrees. She was a highly intelligent, highly motivated person, and yet she was forced into jobs which were for people who didn't have her education or training, because what was accepted by the populace at large wasn't what she had in her pocket. And I said to the people, it is not easy, and I know this because it's not easy to be an immigrant to any country, because there's always a different level that people greet you on and accept you with when you are not of that place. And so I know that from personal experience. But we've got more issues to discuss. I don't know if you wanted to say anything else about all of this. I mean, it was a lot of information that Kenny got from John Malpass. And but there may be some other aspects that you've thought of that you'd like to bring out.
I mean, just as a human, that was incredibly difficult to watch. As a woman who spends a significant amount of time away from her spouse because of his job, the idea that these 2 people who had been in each other's pockets and working together and living together would suddenly be ripped apart, it was really heartbreaking. It was genuinely, honestly, I got quite emotional watching that package, but it just brought me back to the Sheena Halfpenny story that had come out of the Isle of Mull. And so Sheena was a qualified Gaelic teacher from Canada, and the Isle of Mull was in desperate need of a Gaelic teacher. And she was quite happy to accept the post. And then her visa was denied, saying that the council hadn't filled out the sponsor paperwork or some kind of, you know, minute kind of requirement that they claimed that box hadn't been checked properly. And it just seems like there seems to be a disconnect, one might say purposefully, between rural Scotland and the needs of these Highlands and Islands community, and the process and the rules and just the entire sentiment of the Home Office. And for people who are making the argument that the union is our precious union is so incredibly vital to the well-being of the people of Scotland, then I struggle to understand how they could explain that disconnect and how that's serving these rural communities.
Yeah, well, going back to what Mrs. May was saying this afternoon, she was here in Scotland, in Perth, and saying all these wonderful things about all this glory we get from the union of the United Kingdom, and all the different, not only the economic links, but all the personal and the fighting in wars and blah, blah, blah. But all of the things that she said were actually also easily to join to the European Union. And if you don't want the European Union, why would you want these things, and vice versa? Because all the things that she was saying were absolutely interchangeable. I mean, we're a world now that relies on everybody, but we all want our own little individual identities. And also, I don't know about you, but I've met quite a few Greeks, and I was pretty sure you have, Victoria, but Greeks are not Italians. No way is a Greek and Italian, and I've said this before in other places, but no way is a Dutchman, a Frenchman. There's something different about Scots people, and there's something different about Welsh people, and long may it continue, because although we all live on the same planet, we're all Homo sapiens, it makes us feel as if we're special to this particular place and the group of people within it, and there's much more that we could say upon that issue. But I think that you've been out and about today also making another film, and maybe you'd like to introduce that, and maybe the guys in the... Oh, so maybe we can talk. Apparently, we're going to finish the program on that. So maybe you'd like to tell me exactly. I did catch a wee glimpse of it when it was being edited a few minutes ago, but I didn't really have a chance to get into it. So tell us about what you did and where you got the film and who's involved in it.
So I went out to Dingwall today, and when I had been broadcasting from the Ian Blackford event, there was a family that set up, Greg and his wife Cathy, and they were speaking about the experience that they had had, and I was really moved not only by their story but also by something that Ian Blackford said that I feel that really needs to be picked up on. And he was told during this whole back and forth with the Home Office, he was involved as their local MP, and the two things I think need to be discussed. One, it's pretty unacceptable that the state of democracy in the United Kingdom is MPs are having to step in and safeguard their constituents from the hostile environment. That shouldn't really be their job description. And two, when he did this, he said himself at the event, the response that he received from the UK government is, your role in this process should be to facilitate the removal of the Graham family from Scotland.
Gosh.
And he mentioned on how that really brought out, echoes of the Highland clearances to him and how distasteful he found that. And the mood in the room was we all easily came to the same conclusion that it had that sentiment behind it. And I mean, that's quite nefarious. That's not something I say lightly, but that seemed to be the way that he interpreted it, as did everyone else in the room when they heard his statement. So what you're going to see next is my interview with Greg, which is sometimes funny and sometimes quite emotional, and him walking me through the process. But what I really wanted the viewers to get a sense of is, you see these petitions and you read these stories and they're just names. And I think sometimes, especially those of us that are quite involved in politics, you get inundated, and they all blur together. But you have to understand, every time that you hear a story like this, there is a person, there is a family behind the story. And what it feels like to be the David to the Home Office's Goliath, I wanted people to understand the courage and the fortitude necessary to go on that journey, but how hard these people are working to stay in Scotland and to contribute to Scotland, and how worthy and brilliant and what a wonderful contribution they make to the fabric of society, especially in the Highlands and Islands, where we so need it.
And of course, that gentleman, he said about the amount of money. And, if you run a small business, I mean, to pull £30,000 is the requirement, isn't it? The level of income. I wonder how they got that. They thought, well, MP in London gets 77. Well, half that wouldn't be much, would it? So we better. I mean, how do they make these figures up arbitrarily? I mean, it's 16,000, I think, is the kind of average wage. But if you think just out of a little sandwich shop, how much profit can you pull out of a place like that on the Isle of Arran? I mean,
this is what I'm saying about the disconnect between the rural community and the Home Office rules. But also, people are more than a number. The contribution that they make goes beyond this extremely arbitrary amount of money that they've decided is the ineffable amount. It must be this and not a penny less. The contribution that they're making to the fabric of society, to the community.
And the supply chain that Kenny pointed out, wasn't it? From the guy who was selling the leaves to the guy who was baking the bread. And of course, it's not only the income that you have to have as a person, it's the amount it costs to get that visa, isn't it? Because there's quite a substantial amount of money that has to be paid across. And that's is that a money-making exercise for the poor treasury down in Westminster because they've spent all the money on Brexiting? I don't know. It's several billions they've tossed away on that. But actually, these immigration laws have been around a long time, and various different people make them a bit louder, like Mrs. May, and then they get softer. So I think probably we're going to get to the position where we're going to watch your movie. Okay. And so
I hope you guys enjoy it. A lot of heart and soul went into making it.
All right, so I'm going to say goodbye to you, Victoria, and thank you very much for your contribution for going to make this film. I'm going to say thank you to Kenny for having a day out on Arran yesterday, and actually Broadcasting Scotland were up front with this story too. I think we got them first, but of course our circumstances so we can't get the thing out to the public as quick as some of the other guys. But never mind, we were there and the story was great, and thank you very much to Kenny for that. Thank you for watching Broadcasting Scotland, and please watch the video that's going to come up, and we'll be back on Saturday in Ayr for the All Under One Banner March and rally after it in on the lower green there by the seaside. So pack up your bucket and spade and make sure we make a better sandcastle than Gordon Ross, who's on his holidays trying to outdo us, no doubt, before he comes back hopefully next week or the week after. Maybe he stays on holiday for the rest of his life, who knows. Anyway, but thank you very much, and good night to you now. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm here with Greg Brain at his lovely home in Dingwall. So Greg, could you tell the viewers a wee bit about how and why it is that you came to Scotland, and when?
Yeah, sure. We first came to Scotland in 2001 on a much belated honeymoon. My wife's maiden name's actually Monroe. Her family's from just around the corner here. And absolutely fell in love with the place. There was some visceral level where we really felt like we'd come home. We came back again in 2005 to take the holidaymaker's glasses off and just look to see if we could make this work as a working proposition to move here, looking at house prices, cars, jobs. And of course you remember in 2005, this was a booming economy. This was just before the GFC. Everything was going ahead and leaps and bounds, looked really good. Then it was just a matter of trying to figure out a visa and how to get here, and realised that what we really wanted to do was to be able to learn more about Scottish history, Scottish culture. My wife decided that she could actually study here, do a degree course in what was then Scottish Cultural Studies. It actually ended up morphing into a double major as she did the degree into History and Archaeology. But she did that through the University of Highlands and Islands. We came here in 2011. By the time it was 2005 was the study trip, but life kind of got in the way. There was house fire, Lachlan was born. It was 2011 before we actually sold everything up and made the move.
Okay, so it's 2011. She's enrolled at the university.
Yes.
At what point did the plan start going awry?
Well, it started going awry apparently shortly before we arrived, although we didn't know that. We got the visas in 2010. It came to Scotland in June 2011. Apparently in March 2011 it was, and I'll use the word announced, although to this day no journalist and none of our searchers has found any record of the announcement. The Scottish post-study work visa was being cancelled. We found out about it after the event in about 2014, and even then, with my knowledge of civil service, of legislative drafting, I'd convinced Cathy that they'll introduce a basic fairness test here, that they'll grandfather clause it, that it will only apply to people who've applied for their visas after the cancellation date. People who turned up here and committed their lives to coming here based on the promise that this would be available, it will still be available to them.
Of course.
So we found out about it at about 2014. It was brought to our attention, but even then we were convinced it wouldn't apply to us. And so we were still blissfully ignorant that they'd changed the rules on us after we committed, until about 2016 when we applied for, realised we weren't going to be able to apply for a post-study work visa, and Cathy had to apply for a forgive me, I've forgotten the term now. It was a generic extension visa so that we could then work towards a Tier 2 work visa, and that was the one that was refused in March 2016.
So basically, you've changed your entire life. This is years in the making. Australia is not around the corner. You've sold your home.
Even once you first make the decision, if you make the decision right now today, I'm going to move to the other side of the planet, it's a thing that takes months to achieve. If you're going to plan it, then years. We had to sell a house, we were having to pack up furniture, organise the logistics of hiring a container, getting that to a port, onto a ship, getting that over here. Even when we left Australia in 2011, everything that we owned was on a ship halfway here. It arrived after we did. It's an enormous undertaking. We came over here with, the house sale equity, well over £100,000 to finance our time here as what we're going to be a single income student family. We're going to be going backwards while we did that, knowing that once Cathy graduated, then we would both be able to work and the cash flow would turn around. But it's an enormous undertaking, an enormous commitment to sell everything you own, pack what little you can move, and to take that to the other side of the planet.
So you've done all this, and then you're here and you're settled, and you feel like I've built a home and a life for myself, and I belong here, and then you find out that the goalpost has actually been shifted. The rules have changed.
Yep.
And now you've kind of fallen into this chasm that didn't exist before.
Well, even then, even in her early days as the Home Secretary, Theresa May was talking about the pathways to citizenship for contributing citizens. She's saying that we welcome people who want to come to this country to linguistically and culturally assimilate and pay their own way. If that's not a quote, it's pretty close to verbatim. So even then, there was this acknowledgement that the student visa process, which encouraged people to come over who were ambitious, self-starters, by definition educated, ready and willing to contribute to society and studying in the language of the country. If you want to put a bit of topspin on that, by moving to the Highlands, we were also willing to live in what's a fairly sparsely populated and economically depressed area. You would think that would be the gold standard for immigration.
Well, this is a genuine talking point, because you guys are not the only example of people in rural Scotland who have faced the wrath of the Home Office. There's a situation that Broadcasting Scotland covered, which is part of the programme tonight, with the Sykes family in Arran. And we were discussing earlier off air the situation of a prospective Gaelic teacher from Canada who was hired and was very much needed on the Isle of Mull, and had
was the only applicant.
Really?
I think.
And had her visa denied as well. So there's a big disconnect between the necessity for the Highlands and Islands region to import these talented, passionate people who add to the fabric of life here, and the setup in the Home Office, which doesn't seem to understand the reality of life here. So we're at the point in the story now where the rules have changed. You've been made aware of that, and you have put forward this additional application to try and extend the visa. What happens next?
We get a letter in March 2016 saying that the visa application's been refused, and citing reasons which strongly led us to believe that they'd read somebody else's application. It was almost like, some of the stuff they were saying was just so obviously wrong. At one stage they said, we acknowledge that while Lachlan has had some Gaelic education, he'd be able to fit back in Australia. He's in Gaelic medium education. The education is through the medium of Gaelic. English is not introduced until even as a second language in primary 4. He speaks English at home. We read to him in English. He was reading to us in English, but his formal education had no English, and he would have been at a significant disadvantage if he'd gone back to Australia. He would have gone from being one of the bright, gifted kids in the class to being the struggling one. And that's just one of the errors that was. They talked about statements that we made to say that we would leave after Cathy completed the studies, despite the visa application saying the exact opposite. How they thought that a degree in Scottish history and archaeology would be of value in an Antipodean environment, I'm not sure. Actually said that she was pursuing this degree with a view to putting it into practice in the Scottish heritage or tourism industry, as she actually is now doing. This letter arrives in March 2015, and our world at this point falls apart. You've got 14 days to leave the country, and as I explained earlier, it takes months to execute a move like that. If you're trying, without any prior organisation from a standing start, it takes months. To be given 14 days.
With a baron in tow, I'd like to just add that to the viewers.
With a troll who was it's then,
understanding.
Yeah, 7 years old.
And this is his home. This is his community. This is
the only home he really remembers. He's been here since he was 2.5. The letter says that our bank accounts will be frozen. They will be writing to the DVLA in Swansea to have our driver's licences cancelled. We have no access to the NHS for anything other than emergent treatment. Keep in mind, things like chemotherapy are not considered for this purpose to be emergent treatment. You must pay tens of thousands up front. Passports, which they've got as part of the application, have been confiscated and will only be returned to us as we board the vessel at our port of departure. And this is not a persecution letter from the Home Office. This is their standard, your visa has been refused. This is what they do to everybody whose visas have been refused.
How do you, and explain to the viewers, how do you receive that and then say, no, we are going to fight this? Where do you find that strength?
Cathy will tell you I'm one of the most stubborn people she's ever met. I prefer the term tenacious myself. I have worked in legal policy in Australia. I have a very strongly developed sense of right and wrong. I'm not claiming to be the most wonderful person on the planet by any means, but just a sense of fair play, of paying what I owe and being paid what I'm owed. And this was not what was in the brochure. The prospectus that we were presented gave this deal. We invested a 6-figure sum in the investment that the prospectus provided to us. And they're saying, no, we've changed it. We're keeping your money. We've changed the business model. We're no longer interested in providing you with a return. We're closing up shop. Okay. And that was the point at which I said, no, this isn't good enough. Of course, having no idea what it would be like to take on the Home Office in a situation like this is not something you regularly have experience with, but just decided that we would fight this.
So what happens next? What's your next step?
Well, prosaically, the next step was to get in touch with both of our employers that afternoon and say, we can't turn up to work tomorrow. We have to quit with 0 notice. We were both at that point working in small law firms of less than 10 employees, so 2 law firms lost more than 10% of their staff overnight. They were both very underwhelmed, as you can imagine, but obviously they didn't blame us for that situation.
And then at what point does your local MP get involved?
Very shortly afterwards, we got in touch with Ian Blackford and said, this is the situation, the goalposts have shifted, we've applied for this secondary visa because the primary one that we were going to apply for is no longer available. And if I can just give a bit of background for that, the post-study work visa was pretty much a rubber stamp exercise. You finish your course, you finish your studies, you transition almost automatically, provided you haven't done anything particularly stupid, to a post-study work visa, and you've got 2 years to live and work unrestricted. To get a job with an employer and prove your value to them, in Catherine's case, since it's going to be her visa, such that she can demonstrate that she is worth the headache and the expense of a proper Tier 2 work visa. To transition straight to a Tier 2 work visa, Cole, to go to an interview with an employer and say, not only am I good enough to be the best candidate on the day, I'm so good you should spend $5,000 in visa fees and legal fees to the Home Office for a chance of hiring me. They might say no and keep your money. That's a big ask.
That's a huge ask. And so how did that...
So this is what we were presenting to Ian Blackford. And Ian agreed to take up our case, and it was only as the communications with the then Immigration Minister James Brokenshire went on that it came out more and more just how unjust the situation was, just how much they had changed the goalpost, they had canned this visa for people who were already here and relying on it, and how much they were willing to defend this position rather than... If James Brokenshire had said to us at that time, with the initial contact from Ian Blackford, look, a mistake's been made, you were offered a deal, we should honour the deal, there is no post-study work visa anymore, but as Minister I have discretion. I will give you a 2-year visa. You can live and work here unrestricted. Essentially a post-study work visa, but it's just called a ministerial discretion. You would have seen me in the paper smiling and shaking hands with the Tory Immigration Minister, James Brokenshire. Thank you very much. He's done the honourable thing. Great. End of story. It probably would never have been printed anywhere except Inverness Press and Journal. What he did say was, and again this is as near as a quote as I can recall, applicants should never assume that visa pathways that are valid at the time of their entry will continue to be valid in future years. We were naive to believe that the program that they had provided for us would be honoured when we got here.
Well, that's really helpful in the middle of a Brexit negotiation to ken that when the British state says something, it's only valid for the moment that it says it, and you shouldn't presume to believe that that will continue to apply.
That they will actually honour it when you get here.
That's not very reassuring, I don't think.
No. Well, and this was, I can't remember the exact date of the letter, it was May or June 2016. This was right in the middle of the Brexit referendum today.
Okay, so you've enlisted Ian Blackford?
Yes. We've enlisted Ian Blackford. The National ran a story with a picture of Lucky on their front page. And for reasons to this day I still don't understand. Other people have had issues before. For some reason, in the middle of the Brexit referendum campaign, our story captured national and then international attention. We never pitched a story to anybody. When journalists came to us, we made ourselves available to them. I've seen people talk about the PR team we must have had on site. It was just people ringing us and us answering questions.
But I think out of the context that came out of this was the knowledge that you were not unique. You were not the only people having this experience.
Well, we're certainly not the only people having this experience with the Home Office, due to the fact that Cathy was in a 4-year program of study that she'd had to actually extend it for 6 months because of an illness she'd had during one semester. And because the visa process was canned almost as we arrived, by the time it came to light and it became a public issue, we were the last one. Well, at least we were trying to get confirmation from the Immigration Minister who said that this would involve doing anything for us, would open the floodgates. And so we asked the question, well, how many other student visas are there still in play from pre-2011? And they refused to answer. I think the answer was we were the last ones.
Okay.
We were contacted by hundreds of people during that time saying, look, we're having our own battles with the Home Office over spousal visas, over work visas, over whatever. We never got contacted by someone who said they were in the same situation as us with the student visa.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, that said, of course, there were hundreds of people getting all sorts of ridiculous decisions. People who would supply a passport photo in an envelope stapled to their, back then, paper visa applications, instead of glued to the wee square on the form, and having their visas refused because the photo was not attached.
Okay,
We'll keep the £1,000 application fee, but it's refused because you didn't supply the paperwork in the correct format.
So when does this story start picking up the positive nature? Because we're here in your living room. It's 2019,
well,
so
it picked up a bit. I think in May, we were asked to come down to Holyrood to visit Nicola Sturgeon, who was quite frank with us and said that from a constitutional arrangements perspective, with immigration being reserved majesty, that frankly there was very little in practical terms she could do other than lend her support to what was a obviously ridiculous situation. And keep in mind, for context at this point, UKIP MEP David Coburn was supporting our situation, saying that this is an illustration of the obvious failings of the Westminster immigration system. Obviously, he takes that from a very different perspective than perhaps you or I would, but in our particular case, he was supporting it. We were told there would be a couple of cameras there, and we were suspecting a BBC or somebody just there just to take a few photos. And when we came downstairs after the meeting with Nicola Sturgeon, and there was just a media scrum there from all over the world, and at that point, scary as that was for someone, I've had some mental health issues, and that was a terrifying time for me. But at that point, I realised that this was a story that the circumstance, and not us, but the circumstances, the rank injustice of it was such that it was capturing attention around the world. And at that point I thought, maybe Westminster will, or the Home Office, will see the sense in at least doing the honourable thing and giving us what they said they would. Unfortunately, that was not the case, and it was battled on for another 2 or 3 months before Donald MacDonald at the MacDonald Resorts offered Catherine the job of curating the visitor centre and museum that he wanted set up there for their 50th anniversary. And that job was the one that the Home Office, we gave our solicitor the brief to make an application the Home Office couldn't refuse. That was David McLashan, and he was true to his word on that and was able to do it.
So that was the resolution. She was offered a job that met the standards of the Home Office.
Met the requirement for that Tier 2 visa. There was somebody who was willing to go straight from interview to paying for the legal fees, the visa application fees, to be able to get the employer's side of that organised so that we could get that visa sorted.
So this situation becomes resolved because someone steps up and offers the job that meets the requirements of the Home Office.
That's right, yes. Donald MacDonald at MacDonald Resorts, particularly the Aviemore Resort, which that year was having its 50th anniversary, wanted to set up a museum and visitors centre on the resort and offered Cathy the job to curate and create that position. And David McLashan, our solicitor, was given the brief to write a visa application that the Home Office would have no option but to accept. And was fortunately he was able to do that. And so at the 11th hour and the 59th minute, we were able to get the visa that we needed.
But in the end, it wasn't actually Ian Blackford or the First Minister or the Home Office that saved the day.
No. Well, it was Ian Blackford, Alex Salmon, and hundreds of thousands of Scots who kept the public pressure going, which enabled us to have the time to be able to get to that resolution. The actual tipping point was Donald MacDonald's decision, David McLashan's legal skills. But it was eventually finding that Tier 2 compliant position.
But what chance does someone off the street have of hoping that a miracle kind of falls in their lap? I mean,
to be honest, it probably, that sort of situation probably would not happen. As I said, you need to find an employer who's willing to, on first or second meeting, invest, effectively give you a several £1,000 signing bonus in terms of what they're going to have to pay out just to see you walk in the door.
So can you walk me through this as an objective outsider, because you come to this country, obviously we talk about the process that you've been through. Is there a disconnect? At any point in time did you feel like, I have the First Minister standing and giving this really positive and supportive rhetoric, but the fact of the matter is constitutionally she can't do anything? Does that ever come up as frustrating to you in the process? And what effect does that have on how you view Scotland and the current constitutional state?
Oh, absolutely. We have a situation where Westminster has written Scotland-only immigration policies before. The post-study work visa was only for Scottish universities. It was part of the Highland Homecoming program that the Home Office got on board with. And I think that was back when there was Labour governments both in Holyrood and in Westminster. And wrote, my particular visa pathway was for people in Scotland, or people who came to Scotland. Since then, we've had Tory government saying it's too difficult, it can't be done, despite the fact that it had been done months before they came into power. And writing one-size-fits-all policies for the entirety of the UK, where you've got people who are inside the M25, living in an economically booming area, because that's the way the UK economy has been designed to funnel funds to the southeast corner. And you have empty glens up here, my family, McKinnons and McMillans from Skye. You can go down the Elgol Road from Broadford and see ruined churches with gravestones full of McKinnons, my mother's kin. In fact, her ashes, some of them are spread on the grounds of that church. And there, you could, fire a cannon there and get no response. There is just nobody there. These are places that could be populated again. One of the points I've made in talking about this in front of other forums is that there are something like 10 million diasporic Scots around the world, people who claim varying levels of Scottish descent, primarily in the USA, Australia and New Zealand. If 1% of those would actually come home, all of them would say, if you gave them a chance, would you like to move back to Scotland? Oh, absolutely yes. For 99% of them, it's a dream that will never happen. Even if you gave them the visa, they would find a reason not to do it. They're settled where they are. But if 1% wanted to come home, just 1%, if you gave them the visa, you gave them the opportunity, the 1% that you would get would be the people who are young, self-reliant, entrepreneurial risk takers, who have probably got skills that are mobile that they can bring with them and actually use when they get here. We're talking about 100,000 people. 100,000 young people who would come to populate Scotland and use the skills that they would bring with them. They will be young, they will be healthy, because the people who aren't healthy usually aren't going to want to move. They're going to want the security of the healthcare where they are. However good or bad it may be, it's the healthcare they know. So you've got young, healthy, motivated, probably educated people who are desperate to linguistically and culturally assimilate back into the Scotland that they know and love from their parents and their grandparents' stories. You could solve Scotland's demographic problems immediately. You could halt the demographic problems in a year and solve them in a decade if we had immigration policies that allowed Scotland to do that. At the moment, we have immigration policies that are set by government, and I'm not even going to say that they're for the benefit of the UK, they're for the benefit of the Tory party. We have immigration policies that are set to win votes, not to support an economy.
Some food for thought there. In closing, I'm quite keen to know, how has your experience been raising your son here? Would you say Scotland, and the Highlands especially, is a place that young families should come and settle given the opportunity?
You'll have me crying before I finish answering them.
I'm Greek, it's okay to be emotional.
There are, and this may end up being edited, it's a bit of a long-winded answer to illustrate a point. In Australia there is a concept called mateship. In Scotland there are village communities, and they are two different things, subtly different, but the difference is important. When our house burned down in 2008, before Lachlan was born, there was a guy, and we lived on sort of a croft-size properties, of 2.5, 3 acre properties. There was a guy 5 doors up who had a caravan and said, look, you can have this caravan while you need to just get anything sorted. Now, at that point, our insurance company had just gotten in touch with us and said, we'll have a caravan on site for you tomorrow, so that wasn't a problem. We thanked him very much for it. Until that point, I didn't know his name. That's Australian mateship. When something needs doing, they'll step up and help. But before that, you may not... And this is a guy who lived a quarter of a mile up the road. I didn't know his name. I'm now living in a village which is literally so small you can stand in a sheep paddock on Greenhill Street and still read the time off the town hall clock, and everybody knows everybody. I can't walk down the high... not because I'm me, this is the same for everybody. You can't walk down the high street without stopping 2 or 3 times, bumping into someone you know, having a chat. And they know Lachlan, you know their kids, you're talking about their kids, their parents, their family, how things are getting on. And you know these people. There is a wonderful spirit of community. And, this is a place where it is still the case that the village raises the child. To come to a place like this, where art and music and the joy of that beautiful expression, be it, Lucky's learning Classic, he speaks Gaelic, he's to have the opportunity to raise a child in a place like this, in a place where the country got behind us so much when we needed that help, convinced me more than ever that this is very definitely the right place to be bringing up.
Brilliant. Well, from one new Scot to another new Scot, thank you very much for sharing your story. Good night from Broadcasting Scotland.